Developing JavaScript in 2017. ES6, ES7, where do I start? With Raymond Camden.
All right, so hello everybody. This is Raymond Camden. Today I'm talking about ES6, ES7, etc. Where do I start? Or in other words, the oh crap, JavaScript changed again talk. And that sounds a bit painful, but hopefully throughout this presentation, I'll be able to convince you that a lot of these changes are actually a pretty good thing. And while it may be a bit stressful at times, especially keeping up with everything changing, the things that are changing are incredibly good things for us as developers. So with that out of the way, just real quick, I'm Raymond Camden. I'm a dev advocate for IBM. My main focus lately has been on serverless, but I do a lot of API stuff and node things. And if you have any needs for a enterprise cat demo, I am your person. So definitely hit me up for that. I blog at raymondcamden.com. I tweet at Raymond Camden. I'm really easy to find online. And I definitely have a few opinions. And this talk will definitely have a lot of opinions kind of based on my take on things. I definitely think that some people may not agree with some of the things I'm going to say today, and that's fine. I would love to talk to you more about it or explain, why I think the way I do, etc. But with that, let's actually get started. And I kind of want to start by just talking about like how good I am at JavaScript, because I'm really, really good at JavaScript. So I started back when it came out, Netscape Navigator 2.02, when that was the hot thing on the internet. And to kind of give you an idea of how good I was, I still remember the first sets of example scripts I wrote would actually bring my machine down. And when I say bring my machine down, I don't mean like I would lock up the browser like you could do if you put an alert statement in a loop, which I've never done. Honest, I've never ever done that. No, I can remember like the first time I was writing JavaScript, I did something, and I had to power cycle my old gateway PC just to get anything back at all. So I started off really, really good. I kind of went on from there to become a professional DHTML person, and hopefully I'm not the only person in the room who has heard of DHTML. Just to give you an idea of what that means, my job was essentially building rollover menus. So if you've ever seen a menu like on top of the web page and you put your mouse over it and it would highlight, I built code like that, and I did that a lot. And when I was being really fancy, I would do those nice little rollover menus where something would drop down, and for the really complex enterprise menus, multiple layers of flyouts. That was me. And I got even better. So more recently, I'm proud to say, I have failed the Google Code interview, not once, but twice. Mainly because my skills at writing a Sudoku solver apparently weren't quite up to snuff. Instead, I focus on teaching and educating and sharing knowledge and not writing Sudoku solvers. But I'm not bitter, I swear to goodness. But yeah, all of this really is kind of my way of saying that I've been around for a very, very long time, since the beginning of JavaScript, since the kind of the beginnings of web development in general. And while I may not necessarily know everything or even know a small percentage of everything, I've been around enough to see how things have changed, and also to kind of see how well things have improved. So I want to kind of start with a question, and unfortunately with this kind of being a virtual meeting, I can't ask you to raise your hands, but we can pretend you're raising your hand, and if you're in an office someplace, you should do that. That won't look weird at all. So I'm going to make two, I guess, kind of a broad assumption about what type of the developer you are, and I kind of split these into two groups, and that's definitely not fair, and There's definitely people who don't fall into one particular group or the other, but for right now, this is how I'm kind of broadly seeing people. On one hand, I think there are JavaScript coders who, just write JavaScript all day long, whether it's Node.js or, the hardcore client-side development type things. They are focused on working with JavaScript, and that is, if maybe not their only language, it's their primary language for things that they do all day, every day. And they may go to JavaScript conferences and talk about JavaScript on Medium, etc. On the flip side of that are developers who use JavaScript. So I'm primarily thinking about web developers who are probably responsible for HTML, CSS, JavaScript as well. They could be doing some backend work with PHP, Ruby, or Cold Fusion, and then they have to kind of integrate all this stuff together. So taking all these languages, PHP, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and making them work together. And there's certainly nothing wrong with that, but in that particular case, their use of JavaScript may just be, I have to get this darn thing working. I'm not going to worry about, being a JavaScript ninja per se, but I need to do form validation. I need to do the menu rollover. And essentially all they care about is making it work with the rest of the parts. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, but it could also be a bit scary if you're not kind of following along with everything that's changing, and you may be hearing about how you don't need X, you don't need Y. I have to admit, my jaw dropped when I typed in this search term and saw that there were 15 million results for you don't need jQuery. Although it's kind of funny, I think jQuery is still like the #1 library being used out there, and I still think it's a pretty good library, but yeah, it could be, a bit scary in terms of, I'm using a tool, I'm being successful, I'm getting my job done, but I'm hearing that I'm using the wrong tool and I'm not doing things the right way. So taking that into consideration, it may be time to ask kind of, what the heck is actually going on? And in particular, what's going on with JavaScript. So I want to start off with the definition, in particular with the terms that you see on screen here. So I won't read the all these words off the deck, but I'm assuming that you have seen blog posts like the top 10 things in ES6 or what's coming in ES7, what's neat about ES Next or ES Hamburger and ES this, ES that, ES etc. So let's begin by kind of focusing on that ES part. What does that actually mean? So ES stands for ECMAScript, and this is the standard for JavaScript. And the ECMA folks actually have other standards, and in this particular case, ECMAScript actually applies to things outside of JavaScript as well. So if you were a Flash person, first off, hope you're doing okay with all the news lately. But if you ever use ActionScript, then it was also based on this standard as well. And it's pretty darn old. So if I started working with JavaScript in 95 or 94, I forget the exact date, this standard actually came out not long after. And what it essentially does is provide a Bible for JavaScript. Now, that is a horrible word to put in a slide deck. As someone who does presentations, in general, I try to avoid anything even close to politics or religion, even in a joking manner, because it's just dangerous to touch. However, I think Bible provides kind of a good keyword for how to think about this. So much like some people disagree, I'm saying it nicely, about the Bible and what it means, and obviously other texts as well, there are some disagreements in terms of how ECMAScript should be interpreted. So we have an official standard, but you cannot assume that your browser is going to match that 100%. And you shouldn't consider that as like a huge, giant failure of all the browser companies out there. This process is complex. It takes a lot of work. Browser vendors don't necessarily have the same type of schedule as the people working on the standards. And yes, in some cases, there's some competing business needs and things like that that kind of get in the way. The good news, though, is that in general, the browsers are doing a really, really good job of kind of matching this standard. And again, speaking from being a web developer for a very long time, on one hand, we have the complaint of everything is changing, everything is crazy. There's 10,000 JavaScript frameworks and all that. On the other hand, our browsers are a heck of a lot more powerful, a heck of a lot more stable even than what they were for the first 10 years or so of working on the web. So looking at kind of the other part of those ES words, what's up with the 6 and the 2015, etc. So long story short is that initially versioning was being done by numbers. So ES5, which you may have seen before, is kind of like the standard JavaScript. It's JavaScript that probably most of us spend most of our time doing, and we don't probably even think ES5. We just think, I'm writing JavaScript. ES6, you could have thought as like the fancy new stuff, but it's actually been out for a little while now and is pretty darn stable. And ES7 is just, again, going more and more in the future in terms of what browsers will support. What happened is that the ECMA folks actually switched to a yearly release cycle. And when they did that, they realized using numbers like 6 and 7, etc., did not make as much sense as a year-based value. So on the slide that you're looking at right now, essentially ES6 is 2015. ES7 is 2016. And if there were an ES8, and you'll probably actually see ES8 in some places, that would be ES 2017. So to put some dates to this, and it kind of makes sense, ES6 or ES 2015 was finalized in 2015. ES7 or ES 2016 was finalized in 2016. And the good news is that if you know next to nothing about ES6, ES8 or ES 2017 was already finalized. So we're already way behind, but that's okay. And in case you're curious, these were all done in June, which is nice and convenient. So the last update for ES 2017 was updated 2 or so months ago. I will say, from my understanding, is that a lot of these specs in terms of what has changed, they're smaller going from ES6 to 7 to 8. So it's not like a huge change like it was from 5 to 6, or at least in my opinion, going from each of these things. So something else to kind of keep in mind, and this is a critical thing to keep in mind when we're talking about ECMAScript and the specification. You're talking more about syntax versus what I call browser features. So what you're seeing on screen here is an example of what I mean by syntax. So the fact that I can define an array with that bracket notation is a syntax language feature. In case you're curious, there's also an API way of doing it. You can see that in a little sub-bullet there. So the fact that the specification specified that you can create a new array by using the shorthand is an example of the kinds of things that I'm talking about here. What we're not talking about are things that are like more of a browser feature like navigator.serviceWorker. If you've heard anything about progressive web apps, and hopefully you've heard something about it, then this is a feature that's typically mentioned when talking about PWAs. And that's actually not what we're talking about when we talk about ES6. If you've ever heard someone say syntax sugar, for example, they're talking about the specification, the ECMAScript stuff. They're not talking about a browser feature per se. Something else that you kind of want to keep in mind especially as you look at some of the things being done at this level, is that there may be things in there that you will never use, and that's okay. I made the mistake of looking at a particular blog entry, and I'll be talking about this blog a bit later. And in this blog, the author talks about various ES6 features, and there was one that he was talking about, and I was just struggling to understand, like, why in the heck would I ever use this thing? And it occurred to me later that, you know what, I'm actually not the audience for this particular feature. And this thing was actually built to help people building libraries or building frameworks. It's more of a low-level thing that will be very helpful to people who build tools that are useful to more people. So don't think that every single thing you see you should be immediately using in your code. Definitely that does not make sense. So in terms of how you actually find out what's in these specifications, remember this is all written down. So you could hit those URLs that I have on screen there and you could read them, and I will warn you ahead of a time. These are extremely dense. And how dense are they? If you want a formal specification on what the word if means, then this document is for you. These are not the kinds of things that I would recommend reading from page 1 to page 200 or whatever, but rather doing like a Control F to find a particular feature to look for. Again, before going in here, tread carefully. It's going to be a bit of a shock. Most of the time, I would actually suggest looking online at a particular set of blogs and books. And as a presenter, like I always hate saying, don't read the docs, read this random blog entry. But in this case, I think there are some really, really good examples here that are very clear and very helpful. I'm going to start with Dr. Axel, and I'm going to say Rashmeyer, but I may have missaid his name, and I apologize for that. But there's a variety of links there. The first one is just his main blog, and the second two are actual ebooks that he has written, and you can read them online, but you can also pay for a copy as well. But he goes into some extreme detail on ES6 features, and what's nice is that you can pick and choose, what looks interesting, or as I will admit, there are times when I look at some of this stuff and I don't get it. So I put that off, I save it for later, and I save it for a time when I think that I really need to worry about learning that particular feature. The next person I will recommend is Wes Boss. He has a course on ES6. I have not personally taken it, so I can't say, oh, this is good. The reason I recommend him is because he's a smart gentleman in general, and I am taking one of his other courses, and for an online courseware, it is done really, really well. It's a great system. His content is good for Node.js, and I feel very safe recommending his material for ES6 as well. The last person, and I say the last person, certainly there are more people out there talking about ES6 and ES7, et cetera, is Eric Elliott. And he actually has a great blog post that links to more resources. I recommend him in general, and he covers not just code stuff, but even just more broader developer stuff. How do I become a better developer? How do I pass a technical interview? Things like that. But definitely start with this particular link as kind of a way to find more information as well. All right, so how do I actually use this? I know a lot of people, especially those of us who have been in development for a long time, may still have that mindset that browsers are really, really bad. I know I felt that way for a short time myself. But again, the browsers we have today are extremely good and do actually do a very good job at ECMAScript support. Now, when you look at some of the browser features like PWAs and stuff like that, it gets a little bit different. But in terms of the ECMAScript support, it's actually pretty good. There is one main website that I recommend, the Campix one, and it's a big, huge, giant table that you can go to and look at examples. This is just a quick screenshot, and it's a bit kind of out of context and maybe a bit hard to see, but what I like to point out is all the green there. The main issue you see there is IE11, but that's old news. Microsoft Edge is a great browser, so don't worry about it. But in terms of ECMAScript support, it's really, really good out there. You can also look at transpiling, which is essentially a way of taking code and that's written in a newer standard and rewriting it for an older standard. Kind of the gold standard, the best edition of this is Babel, and you can actually see an example up there of it using a ES6 keyword let and how it transforms into ES5, an older version. And if you use this, you have to kind of build a process by which, as you write code, it gets transformed automatically. But again, there are a lot of ways of doing that. But with ECMA support being so good, I don't necessarily think you have to look into this. Last option I will suggest is the caniuse.com. They don't focus just on ECMAScript. They do both ECMAScript and basic browser features. So real quick to wrap up, I'm just going to point out 3 real quick examples of things I like about more of the modern JavaScript. And this actually covers ES6 and ES7. Again, there's more, and I reserve the right to change my mind later on about what I like the best. First one will be template literals. And this solves a great problem. First off, it's a new way to make strings, but it also helps issues with creating dynamic strings. And what I mean by that is if you've ever written code like this, I have a couple of variables and I need to make a string from it, and I have to do HTML and I have to add the string together. And I can't tell you how many times I've had code like this where I've typoed a quote or an HTML string, and it's just ugly. So with a template string, I literally change to a backtick, and that's what tells the browser it's a template string. I can actually embed both new lines and variables inside my string. It's like a lightweight template engine for JavaScript, and this is super useful. Another big one is arrow functions. It's a shorter syntax, and I put simpler in parens there because I'll be honest, arrow functions looked funky as heck to me for a while. Now that I'm using it, I feel a bit more comfortable with them. But the big thing that they handle is working with this, and I'll show you an example of that in a second. So this is an example of an arrow function. I have a regular function on top called hello that's just returning a string. And then that is the second example is the actual arrow function. I drop the function keyword. I use the arrow to kind of flag this as being an arrow function. And if I have a one-line function, I could literally just embed that code. And I have the whole thing on one line. Now that may be a bit obtuse. Here's another example with multiple arguments and multiple lines. And the only change is I've added a bracket to signify that I have multiple lines. So again, this takes a bit of getting used to, but it's really nice once you get familiar with it. And it's great for callbacks. The other issue it handles very well is a this scope problem. I'm going to steal an example from the Mozilla Developer Network. If you run this code on screen here, what's going to happen is that this.age will not be scoped to the this.age and the person object. If you look at P over time, it's never going to change. Literally just switching to an arrow function automatically fixes it. If you've ever seen anyone do something like that.x equals this.x, they're fixing a problem that arrow functions now fix baked in. The last one I'll show is async await. This one is kind of really, really crazy. I'm still learning it. Still a bit weird to me, but essentially, if you've ever done anything asynchronous, you know it could be a bit difficult. There's multiple solutions to working with this: callbacks, promises, observables, and this is a new way. Real quick example, I have 2 asynchronous functions, slow1 and slow2, that are returning promises. You can imagine these being 2 network requests or 2 DB requests, essentially 2 things that are asynchronous. In the past, one way that I would solve this possibly is to use something like promise.all. Promise.all will say, I'm passing an array of promises, and when every single one of them have resolved, call my then function and then send in the results. I work with the results, and then I have my final thing, in this case, total. That's not too bad, especially if you're familiar with promises. But the async await stuff is kind of cool. I begin by kind of marking my function with the async keyword. And then once I've done that, inside my code, I could simply write it almost like it was synchronous. I could tell my code to wait for slow 1 and wait for slow 2 to finish, and then I have my result. Admittedly, this is still something that I'm still kind of wrapping my head around, but I really like how this syntax looks and how simpler it is to kind of read. So that was kind of quick. Again, if you have kind of fallen behind a bit or have not taken the time to look at what has changed in JavaScript, now is a great time to do so, especially with ES6 being so well supported. If you have any questions about this and I don't get a chance to answer it today, and I don't think I will because I'm running a minute late, definitely reach out to me. I struggle as well. Every single day I do something incredibly stupid in JavaScript. I figure I'll stop in about 20 years or so and I'll finally learn it well. But definitely reach out to me. I will be happy to help any way I can.
Thanks for watching.